great human tradition is the idea that we can both integrate and synthesize everything that's gone before to reveal a vision of human potential that's never been seen before. And that is actually a birthing point for a tradition that is more than the sum of the parts. It's actually something that it's a new spiritual renaissance in a certain way.
Welcome to the Max Hack podcast. This is part 2. Jon Eden Khan, welcome back.
Hi.
I'm so glad to have you back. In part 1, we talked about the 2 vectors of awakening, radical awakening and evolutionary awakening. Jon also shared an overview of the Trans-Himalayan Teachings and initiations. And we also spoke about integral theory. And in this part 2, we're gonna build onto the first part of the podcast, and we're gonna dive into one of the main, aspects that you share in the book Earth is Eden as well, which is the great human tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So please give us an overview. What is the idea or the model of the great human tradition?
Sure thing. Yeah, so I feel like there have been teachers, philosophers, sages, people who've been like authors who have been in a process of starting to take in the wealth of transformational insight and wisdom that human beings have generated over the course of our history. And that has been more and more possible as we have been moving into more and more of a globalized world. That as we move more and more into a globalized world, we start to take in what's here, basically, and we start to have more and more awareness about the different traditions that have existed around the world that have been focusing in on various aspects of our potential. Mm-hmm. So
one example would be the Tibetan teachers after the invasion came through the West and start teaching here.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have so much more access and connection to what they've been cultivating and developing over the last millennium, mm-hmm. you know. So, and it's often the case, you've probably heard this, I've heard this, that when people speak about different religious or transformational pathways, very often people say something like, well, they're all just different pathways leading to the same place, mm-hmm. right? And what I would suggest is, I don't think that's true. And I think that actually they are often focusing on different aspects of human potential. And that doesn't mean there isn't a single overarching reality to our being and also to life, that they're tuning into different aspects. But it means that actually there are really important differences around the different aspects of human potential that they are tuning into. So, for instance, Amazonian shamanism is not going to the same place as, Tibetan Buddhism. And you could say simultaneously, Christian-inspired soul work is not going to the same place as Advaita Vedanta. These are zoning in on different aspects of human nature and human potential. But what's possible as we've entered into a more globalized world is starting to see how they all fit together in a way that has never happened before. And so the great human tradition is actually, it's a phrase that was used by Adidar. So I spoke a little bit about Adidar in our last conversation and, shared my own personal sense of how Adidar is both an extraordinary teacher and sage, and I don't know if I said it before, but Ken Wilber has this thing where he says, anyone who's seriously interested in awakening cannot afford to not read Adidar, mm-hmm. But also I think there were major issues with some of the way that Da did things and some significant shadows that are really important to talk about. But I feel like Adidar was one of a number of these people, these teachers, these authors, these theorists, who have made a really significant contribution to the question of, okay, how do we put all of this together? And, I feel like, for instance, others are Aurobindo, Sri Aurobindo, really got deeply into the inquiry around what does an integral spirituality look like. And what Aurobindo did in a way that is unprecedented was he really integrated the different major contributions of the Indian spiritual tradition with an understanding that they are, for instance, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, Jnana Yoga. They are speaking to different aspects of the human being, and actually they don't need to be in competition with each other, but together they can give us a sense of human potential that we've never seen before. And I'd say people like Helena Blavatsky, who initiated the Trans-Himalayan Teachings, also people like Barbara Marx Hubbard, who, you know, was doing her thing up until recently. Love Barbara. Andrew Cohen, Ken Wilber, my teacher Bruce Lyon. I feel like these are all people who have been tuning in to, wait a minute, there's a possibility that's present now because of our access to these different traditions that has never existed before. And that possibility is for us to start to see how they fit together, to give us at first a vision and then an opportunity to experiment with a path that includes their different contributions brought together to activate into blossom the different aspects of human potential that we've never seen before. And I think, you know, there's more that can be said about that in terms of, you know, I appreciate the way that we explored it in Earth is Eden, which in many ways was informed by Dustin's background, because Dustin is such he's done such incredible work around integral religion and spirituality and the different types of integral religion and spirituality that are possible at different mimetic structures, basically at different levels of, how do I put it, different levels of collective meaning making. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, just to trace those through, and because I think it's a valuable thing to spend some time with, one could say that when religious practitioners or people are at a traditional structure of development, often they don't have much interest in making contact with and comparing their practices with other traditions and pathways, because they have more of a tendency, it's more ethnocentric. That stage of development is more, there's more of a tendency to feel like, well, I think we've got the right one. Mm-hmm. You know, I think ours is probably right, and maybe we have a tolerant relationship with the fact that there are other pathways, but we think we're probably the right one. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, you know, that's where we are.
So people at a traditional level would believe my religion, my path is the right one.
Yeah.
The other ones are probably wrong.
Yeah. That and the more unhealthy versions of that is that they're not tolerant to other traditions or communities, but they're actually actively aggressive towards them, right? So at that traditional kind of structure of development, there isn't much interaction that tends to happen between pathways and traditions. When we get to a modern structure of collective development or development that's held by the people that are in question, that is where we understand that we get into the first world-centric stage. So there starts to be a sense of an overarching single field that there are different pathways and traditions that are in, and it's worthwhile and worthy to actually start to study each other's material and start to get a sense of what's out there. And what Dustin and I traced was, okay, well, that's where you start to get the study of comparative religion, right? So the study of comparative religion is an academic discipline that involves academics and researchers trying to study different pathways and traditions. And there's a great value to that, but there's also problems, which are they're studying those traditions very much in a third person form. So I'm studying information, right? So it's like I can get myself a bunch of books about Sufism, right? And just really read those books and do my best to study that material and do my best and do my best and do my best. And there's value in that. I'm taking in a broader sense of the world and the sense of possibility as far as paths of spiritual transformation are concerned. The problem is I'm not actually in contact with the inside of the tradition. Like, I know for myself, having studied a lot about Dzogchen before I actually received initiation into the pathway and received teachings from my Lama, there were things that I started to experience in relationship with him, in contact with the living sharing of the tradition, that I had never read about in books. So there's whole extra layers of insight that you gain access to, and I feel like that when we start to then get into the postmodern stage of development, then what starts to happen is that there starts to be not just an interest to study the objective material or information from different traditions, but to actually come into relationship. And so you start...
And by coming into relationship, it's actually experiencing what they talk about, which is actually beyond the words.
Absolutely, and friendships start to get built, because there's a sense of pluralism that comes with that stage. There's a sense of the valuing of diversity within a field of recognized equality, of actually, the Christian mystics and the Advaita mystics and the Amazonian shamans or Peruvian shamans or whatever. Wonderful. It's all just within a field of more and more celebrated pluralism and diversity. And so actually, there's some of there was a Christian mystic, Bede Griffiths, who is quite well known, who went and lived in India for years. And there was a whole movement of deep connection that emerged, an exploration of Christian mysticism and Indian mysticism and so on. And for me, that's an expression of this kind of postmodern availability to relationship and to building relationships that give us the relational contact that allows us to ask the questions, what's that like for you? What's that like for you when you're doing that practice, or you're communing with the sacred in that way? How does that feel? And what are you doing? And are you willing to share that with me? And yes, I'm willing to share mine with you, The problem of that stage is it tends to project a kind of equality and sameness over the field of diversity. So diversity of practices and pathways and communities, it's all the same, right? It's just different things that are ultimately the same, which is what I was commenting on a moment ago, which is it's a valuable perspective, and I don't think it's ultimately true. Because then I think when we start to get into a more integral stage of looking at this stuff, then we start to see that actually, okay, no, wait a minute, there are different aspects of the human being, body, sexuality, emotions, mind, soul, spirit, our ultimate essence. And then you can look at those also through the quadrants in terms of our interior experience, our embodied experience, our collective experience, that different practices and pathways are directly zoning in on and doing something extraordinary with. So, I feel like this is just to say we've been on a journey, and for instance, I've spoken about the Trans-Himalayan Teachings a bunch in the conversations that we've had so far, and I feel like Trans-Himalayan Teachings they've been great at making a contribution to this wider field of the emergence of a global integral spirituality, and another name for that is like the Great Human Tradition, the Great Tradition. They've also been pretty bad, I think, at getting stuck in the trap of that kind of modernist study of comparative religion issue, which is to believe that you really understand other traditions because you've studied them. Trans-Himalayan traditions have done that. The Trans-Himalayan tradition and the teachings have done that at times in a way that I found a little bit infuriating. I still find it a bit infuriating sometimes, and I take it as an injunction for our evolution that's needed. Like, we need to actually make contact in a deeper way with people in other spiritual traditions and pathways before, and build relationship with them who are insiders to this tradition. And then the integral level is well, actually, we need to become insiders ourselves. We need to become, if I'm going to integrate Shaiavite tantric teachings about awakening to the true nature of reality with Western Rolfing approaches to body work, with neo-tantric approaches to erotic integration, with Western psychotherapeutic approaches to trauma resolution, with Christian soul work, whatever. If I'm going to actually try and integrate those things or speak for them, advocate for them as part of a holistic path, I actually have to become an insider. I have to become an insider of those lineages.
In the sense, you have to experience what they talk about.
Exactly. To be able to be able to speak for it authoritatively in a way that is sound, And I think we can also speak for, I'm fascinated to speak about certain traditions that I'm not an insider of, but I think it's important to acknowledge our limitations when we do that, and something I'm thinking about now quite a lot is like, okay, well then this leads us to an interesting place, because actually I can't really probably be an insider to all the traditions, and you can't be an insider to them all. And what about actually if I'm just an insider to the ones that turn me on most deeply and that I feel most passionate about, and that feel like they carry something that I'm so passionate and curious about, and that makes me a particular cocktail of, so for me, I know that's Dzogchen, Integral, the Trans-Himalayan Teachings, South American shamanism in various ways, Western psychotherapy. These pieces in me feel I have a passion for them, But then what about if I come into contact with someone else? So it's some other collection of traditions and pathways and practices that speak to the different aspects of what it means to be a whole human being. For me, the interesting thing then is, okay, well, what about if the holism of bringing it all together is not an individual job? What if the revelation of the beauty of how all of this comes together is something that can actually only be revealed in a group, in a community of people who are each dancing with their own unique integration of the parts that they're most passionate about, the pathways or the teachings. And then when we come together, there's something else that starts to emerge between us, because I've integrated these pathways and teachings, and you've integrated those pathways and teachings. And I sometimes I joke sometimes when I teach retreats that I start a session sometimes by just saying, sometimes I like to think about medieval Kashmir. And people look up at me like, what's he about to say now? Where is this coming from? But one of the reasons that I genuinely love to think about medieval Kashmir sometimes is because prior to the first millennium, we know that part of the world just became a melting pot. It became a melting pot for a bunch of yogis and yoginis and siddhas and practitioners and teachers and philosophers from different pathways and traditions who, for whatever reasons, who knows, they started to gravitate to this place, and there was some transformational cauldron that they started to create with each other, where they started to share with each other their practices. And we know that there are certain extraordinary traditions that human beings are still fascinated by today, over 1,000 years later, which were energized there. So certain aspects of Tibetan Buddhism, Mahamudra, Dzogchen, Kashmir Shaivism, and so on, and from the Swat Valley in Pakistan as well. Like there's something that extraordinary happened in that time that birthed whole traditions that we're still so passionate about, so many of us who are connected to them. So I like to think about, okay, well, what's the version of that today? What would it take, and how exciting would it be for there to be some new cauldron, and melting pot where there's practitioners of different cultures. It's not just in Kashmir, it's actually human beings from different nations and ethnic backgrounds and different, all the variety of humanity who are simultaneously dedicated practitioners who are passionate about bringing the pieces of what humanity has developed over thousands of years together for something new to be born. So that's the great human tradition. The great human tradition is the idea that we can both integrate and synthesize everything that's gone before to reveal a vision of human potential that's never been seen before. And that is actually a birthing point for a tradition that is more than the sum of the parts. It's actually something that it's a new spiritual renaissance in a certain way, which has the possibility to develop now.
Mm-hmm. So in my spiritual journey, I would say I encountered more than one teacher who would tell me at a certain point you should choose the one path to go all the way to the end, or enlightenment, or whatever we call it. What is your thought on that?
Yeah, I think for me, I have different things that come up in response to that question. And I think sometimes people have a valid critique of syncretism, of just throwing a bunch of stuff together, and there's a new age shadow around that, where there's a superficial syncretism in my view, and I try and say that mostly without judgment. But yeah, so I live in Berlin, right? And I love Berlin, and there's a bunch of what I would call superficial syncretism here. There is a new agey kind of like, oh yeah, I'm just going to throw this in here and a bit of that in there, and we joke here in Berlin that you can access some kind of new age, neo-tantra, cacao ceremony, conscious kink, tango event every night, so, every night. So with a medicine ceremony thrown in there somewhere,
I bet I would find that on Facebook tonight as an event.
Right, it's not hard. That's part of the beauty of Berlin, right? And I don't want to poo-poo that scene, right? And there's real value that people are accessing in various ways. And if we're really speaking to an intentional integration of transformational practices that are dedicated to really zoning in skillfully and powerfully on different aspects of the human being to help us flower into greater integration and wholeness, then I think there's a different way to do it, which I would call, I think there can be a more sophisticated syncretism that brings together deliberately these different pieces. And to your question around whether at some point you ultimately need to focus in just on one thing, I think my view about that question is that might be the case for phases of the path. And my view is that I trust people to tune into what feels like the important focus of a particular phase of their path. I know for myself, I can have phases of my path that are very much focused on a particular aspect of my being, and that might be the case for 6 months or a year or 8 months or 2 years. There was a phase that I had a few years ago it just had to be deep personal healing work, and that was the fundamental focus. And I feel like now for the last 6 months it's been very much in radical awakening, and that's been the core focus. And before that, probably for about 2 years, was really focusing on monadic alignment. And before that, soul, and then embodiment, and erotic integration has been in there as well. So I think I invite people to really tune into what feels really true for a particular phase of their path, and go for it with that. And who knows, maybe that might involve it stays the same until they burst into a flash of light and it's all complete, or it's that way for 2 years and then it's something else. Yeah.
In the book, we have this graphic, and I will added here right now, where there's the circle and the different symbols of different religions.
Yeah.
With the different stages from traditional to integral, like all pointing into the circle.
Yeah.
When you look at this graphic, if we talk about it a bit, maybe you could explain that graphic a bit.
Yeah, sure.
And also, when people arrive within the circle, is their internal experience of awakening, is it the same for everyone, or is it still like individual, depending on the past they're coming from?
So this is speaking to the point I was making before about the stages of people's availability to a genuinely integral, for us here, cosmocentric, global spirituality. So the point that we're making here is that it's in the integral stage and stages of development that a person becomes available to that type of spirituality. And something I didn't mention before is that another way to track these stages is, as we've done here, from egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric to cosmocentric. That, egocentric is self-explanatory. I care about me, and that's really what I'm interested in. Ethnocentric, I was mentioning the traditional kind of structure of development which has a tendency to be ethnocentric. I think my group is really the group, and I might tolerate your group, but I really think my group's better. And worst case scenario, I'm aggressive to your group because any other group apart from my group is wrong and bad. World-centric, where we start to get, okay, there's a single playing field that we're all operating within, and there's equal rights. I might want mine still to be the best, but I still give you equal rights. And that's, as I said, generally correlated with where the study of comparative religion starts to become interesting to people. I guess you could say the postmodern stage is another version of world-centric, but it's much more inclusive and relational. It values pluralism and diversity and equal opportunity in a way that is much more connected. I think I remember Sean Esmond Hagens years ago, integral teacher and author. He suggested that we should talk about a stage after that, which he called Earth-centric or Gaia-centric, where I appreciate that distinction, because for me, world-centric is still quite human-centric, still quite, I'm a human who has a sense of the world, and that I take the world stage into my feeling process and cognitive process and embodied sensing. But I do like the idea of Earth-centric, or what he calls Gaia-centric, because it allows us, there is it is something else to start to take in the earth as a living organism that, is something that we can experience ourselves as a cell, within. I think that's something that starts to come online as we transition into integral. And then cosmocentric, as we start to, have a ability to functionally take in this extraordinary, oh my God, what are we a part of? And I think that's one of the great values of the Trans-Himalayan Teachings, is they offer a non-fluffy, intellectually rigorous, yet still awe-inspiring and genuinely psychoactive cosmocentric spirituality. So, in terms of this, and to your question, I feel like, yes, every tradition produces certain biasing perspectives. So the fact that, for instance, in the Buddhist awakening pathways, they generally always have a way of understanding absolute reality as it is. It is beyond self, right? They talk about it as true nature, or it's accessed through a recognition of the non-reality of the separate self. It's spoken about without self, as it were. the Indian tradition speaks about the self, and the ultimate self, and so on, and that extends all the way through to the Shaivite tantric practices that even see absolute reality as having powers of a great self, that absolute reality is willing and knowing and acting, and everything that's arising is an expression of that great self's powers to will and to know and to act. And so I think it's ultimately the same reality that's being accessed, but there are obviously different biasing perspectives. And so, yes, I think that people can have a different experience of the same reality because of the biasing perspectives of the tradition they've come through. And then it's just really interesting relationally to feel like, okay, well, how do you experience this? How do I experience this? And there's a recognition, I guess, there that comes with that of our human limitations to really ultimately take in the fullness of these realities. We get into very interesting philosophical questions there, which are, can we nakedly, truly, ultimately nakedly experience these realities that we're talking about? And if so, is there just a right answer? Is there, or it just is like this? Or how much is there still the limitations of our interpretive nature? And that's a really valuable point Ken Wilber made, which is that people can have spiritual experiences at any stage of development, but their interpretation of those experiences will be colored by their level of development. So someone who has an experience of the sacred field of souls who's a Christian and who is operating at a kind of ethnocentric stage of development is likely going to interpret that probably within Christian terms, and that they're lucky to experience that, and probably people from other traditions won't because their tradition is the right one, and so on down the line. So it seems like there are always subtle interpretive dimensions to how we interpret spiritual experience that are influenced by the pathways and the teachings that we go through. You were going to ask this question about priming, which I feel like this kind of speaks into that, in my view.
Please bring it in.
The biasing perspectives, the teachings, the models of different traditions prime us to have experiences that have certain qualities and flavors that if we went through another pathway might prime us differently. And I still think it's the same thing. Ultimately, I still feel it's my deep conviction that there is a single reality, that we are, it's the whole example of the elephant, that you've got different people, different blind people are all feeling different parts of the elephant, and are they feeling something different, or is it the same thing but it's just different perspectives? So, yeah.
You just mentioned Gaia and cosmocentric, earth-centric. You also write about the purpose of the earth, and I'd be curious to hear your perspective on it. I was just watching Matthias De Stefano some days ago again, and he said if you're born as a human on planet Earth, you wanted to be here, you wanted to experience humanness. So I'm really curious, what is the purpose from your perspective of the earth and of being human?
Yeah, so I would say that I feel like this territory is one of the major gifts of the Trans-Himalayan Teachings, and the revelation of these teachings, these ideas, this kind of information, these teachings would say is part of the advanced stages of evolutionary awakening, which also in advanced stages comes with radical awakening. They become one thing at that stage. There's more and more opening to the ultimate ground of being, but there's also more and more levels of what's really going on, that start to reveal themselves. And so in those stages, it's said that part of part of what reveals itself in the experience of the initiate is greater and greater revelation of what we're part of, and that we are essentially part of a living being. You know, that the earth is not just a rocky planet, you know, just that has some frisky dust that has miraculously, randomly had these interesting, problematic, incredible things called humans develop on it in a way that somehow we've connected to the stuff we've connected to. But actually, the earth in these teachings is understood to be a Buddha, even in a certain way, that a being of extraordinary levels of development, a multifaceted being, that where Gaia, for instance, would be understood to be just one aspect of that cosmic entity of the earth, and that Gaia would be understood to be the living body of the earth. But the idea would also be that the earth has a soul, you know, and the earth also has a monad. The earth has a cosmic core of divine life and spirit that is at its core and is anchored in the core of the earth, and a field of soul that is inhabited by masters and saints and sages from all traditions and none who've reached liberation over the ages that have been, and there's the living, vital, sacred body of the earth. So just that is an interesting framework that has us start to, we can tune into the idea of, oh, isn't that interesting? The idea that there's a field of soul consciousness that different traditions might understand their awakened beings to start to participate in. These ideas of, in the Trans-Himalayan Teachings, there's this understanding of what it calls hierarchy, or the you know, we're not talking about a pathological hierarchy of domination and control there. We're talking about a hierarchy of increasing beings inhabiting increasing levels of love and responsibility and service within the bigger game. And the bigger game being the evolution of the earth and its significance within a wider cosmic framework. But, you know, interesting that perhaps if we were to look at shamanism and shamanic traditions over the course of history, probably they're actually tuning into a different aspect of the being of the earth. They're tuning into the sacred presence and energy and life that pervades the living body of the earth, for instance. That's just an interesting thing to kind of, little door to look into. But
I want to dive deeper into also shamanism and plant medicines later.
Yeah. So in terms of the cosmic purpose of the earth, it would be, the idea here is that if we just start with a human being, part of the way that we understand a human being evolutionarily is that every soul has a particular keynote that is its purpose to express in a particular incarnation, or even across a series of incarnations. And we know, if we just tune into the journey of an individual human being, that it takes a long time for them to actually become available to that. Often they have to go through experience and lessons exploring their personality structure and their personal ambitions and their personal desires, and working out if that really is going to bring them the fulfillment that they hope for. And generally everyone's greatest teacher is suffering eventually, which comes and initiates us into some kind of existential crisis, whereby we start to feel humbled and more available to some deeper thing that wants to come through, which starts to take us into our soul path. And then as we go on that journey, people start to uncover, what is it that wants to come through me? Actually, there's some unique note of purpose and love and service and creativity that wants to come through me. So the Trans-Himalayan teachings, they work on the Hermetic principle, as above, so below. You know, and there's, even I read the other day, there's a version of that in the Kala Chakra Tantra, in the Eastern tradition, that they also have this principle that the structure of the microcosm of the human being is mirrored in the structure of the macrocosm. That there's in the book we call it a cosmic holonic ecology. There's a structural integrity to how the human being or the planet or the solar system or the galaxy can all be understood as beings that have certain shared structures of having a fundamental core as spirit, a soul field around that, a form that it's being incarnated through with a chakra system, and in service of a particular scale of the revelation of divinity. So the earth is understood to be a being who is in service to a particular revelation of divinity. And that framework allows us to start to tune into us. Okay, well, what might that be? And yeah, these really represent some of the most advanced dimensions of the Trans-Himalayan teachings of everything that we've received so far. But what those teachings tell us is that the earth is a place where a great cosmic adventure is being attempted. That actually we know actually, as esoteric and transcendental as all this might sound, it's quite intuitive to us that part of the journey and lesson here is about the revelation of the sacred in these very dense bodies, in this very rich, challenging, messy, beautiful, sensorily rich embodied experience. It's intuitive for a lot of people that a lot of what we're here for is about how we wake up to who we truly are in this level of embodiment. And the Trans-Himalayan teachings would say that actually the density of Earth has a certain rarity, at least in our galaxy, that the evolutionary process that's happening here, these teachings would say that life, right, because if I back up a moment, so such a huge question that we've been in for a long time is, are we alone? Mm-hmm. Right? Are we alone? And there's good evidence, so far at least, that we are, because where are they? If not, and then there's also good evidence that we're not, because it seems like maybe we've had some kind of contact. And
when you look into UFOs,
there's so much
coming
there.
out.
Yeah,
right?
I've spent a long time there as well. There's some very, very compelling stuff. What the Trans-Himalayan teaching, they have an interesting perspective on all of this. They basically say that life, and they speak about our galaxy. These masters say, actually, they humbly say, we can't speak for beyond this. That's the limit of what we've been able to realize. But they say life within our galaxy is not rare. However, what they say is life at this level of density of embodiment is much rarer. Now, what that suggests is that there are many other evolutionary processes with all sorts of beings that are happening on subtle levels. And perhaps those beings have a capacity to precipitate into physical embodiment for periods of time, but ultimately their way of being is understood to, most of the other evolutions have been occurring on subtle levels. And so the understanding is that Earth is a place where a big adventure has been undertaken to see if the revelation of divinity can be taken into a density of embodied matter that is rare, actually, within our galaxy, because this starts to get into some of the mysteries of matter. It's understood that in matter there is profound power, and that part of the purpose of Earth is to go first. Earth is understood to be like a cosmic scout in a certain way, to try and take this revelation of divinity into a density of matter that is rare, and then to transmit the life force that exists in this matter out into the cosmos in a way that can support other civilizations to come into physical matter, that can support their embodiment, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea is that we can cosmically move towards a place where these other civilizations start to anchor themselves in physical matter as well, and whatever.
Because they're already there, but not in the physical,
not in the physical
third dimension.
Yeah. And so we might start to have some kind of community of civilizations operating on the physical as a result of that. But the understanding is that Earth is playing a risky, pioneering role in that. And yeah, it's just really interesting to think about these things, right? Because even thinking in that context, that there is a purpose that we are here for that is actually much bigger than how we get on with each other, you know, but actually that humanity, you know, most utopian visions that human beings have had for a really long time basically just amount to us living in harmony with each other and the earth. That's it, really, right? And what these teachings are saying is that's page one. That's page one. You know, even the most out there, wow, that feels like a lot to talk about. That seems hopelessly idealistic. I don't know if I even have time for that. Utopian visions that people have spoken about through history, page one. And that actually there is a destiny awaiting humanity that is cosmic. There's a destiny awaiting Earth that is cosmic on the other side of us being able to navigate. And this is where we start to situate, you know, start to zone in. You know, these teachings say that actually the crisis that's happening on the planet right now is this birthing process, is this initiation, that there is a planetary initiation for humanity as a species, but also for the Earth as a being. These teachings understand the Earth as a being is undergoing an initiation right now. It's affecting all the kingdoms of its life, humanity being one of them. That is resulting in a transformational process whereby we will be reintegrated into the cosmic field that we have always been a part of, and yet by virtue of our immersion in the density of matter that we're in, have been quarantined from in a certain way because of our inability to remain awake to who we truly are whilst in this density of matter. And that's actually something, that's a narrative that exists through the spiritual traditions through time. The ancient Greeks had this idea of the river Styx, the river of forgetfulness, and it's a journey that we all have coming into incarnation. How many of us remember who we truly are as a soul when we're born in the body? No, actually we forget that, most of us, because the matter realm of life has not been fully linked up with the soul realm of life. There's not been a continuity of consciousness so that we remember truly who we are whilst in these bodies. And so much of the path is, let's link that up. Let me remember who I truly am and live that fully and truly in my body, in connection with the earth and in connection with those I love and in my community and purposefully, and so on. Is linking all of this up. So the understanding is that also is the case cosmically, that the being of the earth has, in a certain way, not been able to maintain conscious connection to the cosmic community that we are and have always been a part of, because it's gone into such deep matter. And there's a beautiful way of thinking about that, which is, it's like the willingness of a being who trusts its innate divinity so truly that it's willing to give itself to a process where it knows it's going to forget for a period of time, because it trusts it. However long it takes, I will remember. I will come home to myself. I will awaken again. And so that's part of the significance of our time in these teachings, that, and this is a kind of bigger picture of the great human tradition consideration. You know, it's like, okay, cool, it's good for us to talk about the great human tradition, but from a planetary perspective, what does that mean? Well, it means actually we're starting to have an awakened community on the earth. We're in the beginning phases of having a community of awakened initiates of all nations and all cultures and all backgrounds and all traditions, who can be conscious anchor points for not just an awakening to the ultimate ground, as that's what life really is, and that's what really truly ultimately is the nature of what is here. But actually evolutionarily, cosmocentrically, there's a big thing that we're a part of that we're only just starting to get a sense of. And of course, you know, people will be able to feel we're right on the edge of any of this starting to knock on our door, because of the crisis that we're collectively facing, which is demanding, the ecological crisis, the global resource crisis, the global wealth inequality crisis, the geopolitical crises. What are these asking for? Well, they're asking for the emergence of a global humanity that can live in harmony with itself and with the earth. Nothing less is going to solve the issues that we collectively face. Nothing less, and that's part of the genius, in a certain way, and the intelligence of the crisis. And then the Trans-Himalayan Teachings, there's a piece that says there is a cosmic revelation that is on its way, and humanity is not even world-centric yet. Mm-hmm. So you can feel the tension. That's one way I feel the tension of what's happening in the world right now. It's like there is a cosmic revelation that's coming that is actually, we haven't even begun to realize what we are in terms of the wider cosmic framework. And yet, so much of the tragedy and the conflict and the pain of the world is that we're struggling to even be world-centric.
Right. So, hearing all of that, I assume that all of that is somehow informing the idea of singularity, the party, and this is going to be part 3. Yeah. So it's going to be the next podcast. So we don't dive into this now, but in the next episode. So I'm already super excited about that. Yeah. You already mentioned shamanism. How do you see the role of plant medicines that are becoming more popular in the West, especially? How do you see the relationship to plant medicines and how are they useful?
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes I joke that I think, how part of the way that evangelical Christians work is there's a tendency, one of their things is they go to people's door and they knock on the door and people answer the door and they say, have you heard the good news? Have you heard the good news of the Christ story? And there's a legit dimension to that. The Christ story is good news. But I like to think, there's another kind of good news. And the other kind of good news is these medicines grow in the earth. I think that's amazing, right? That there are plants that grow on the earth that support us in the most extraordinary and heartbreakingly sacred and profound ways to come home and to heal and to remember who we are and to remember what's right in terms of how we live in harmony with ourselves and with each other and with the earth. What good news. What amazingly good news, And I think that part of, we're coming out of, some of us are coming out of, I feel like humanity is starting to edge its way out of the last couple of thousand years that has had a strong focus on feeling like we need to leave the embodied realm in order to find the sacred. Whether it's just look at the Abrahamic traditions, that there's a kind of differentiation from the body and sexuality and nature and earth to reach towards the sacred that exists in a higher plane in some way. And I feel like part of what's happening now, and the Trans-Himalayan Teachings have a whole model for this around the dawning of a 7th ray age and the Aquarian age and so on, but keynotes of it are the remembrance of the sacred that's always been here, that actually there's enough. And it's not like we went on a journey we didn't need to go on. It's like that there's an increasingly enough soul maturity as a result of having done the journey over the last couple of thousand years that we've done. I'm speaking in collective terms now. There's big differences individually, obviously. To be able to realize the sacred life and energies and intelligence that has always pervaded the biosphere and has always pervaded the body of the earth, and to realize that actually matter has never been the guilty party, as it were, but in a certain way we've just not been mature enough. Like, we have been on an evolutionary journey and we've been at that stage of the process where we've been cut off, essentially cut off from ability to stay connected to who we are in the higher planes, and also so fused with matter to not be able to have enough freedom to see its sacredness. And we've created a mess in the middle. And the problems of human culture are self-created. We've created this. And there's a process of realizing, I feel like actually there are tremendous forces of intelligence and sacredness and grace and support that live through the material and the embodied in the world of nature and the body of the earth that we're only just starting to realize. And plant medicines are part of that. And of course, as much as this is the case, there have also been communities and traditions that have stayed with this, that have not forgotten this, as the rest, as a lot of human culture has been building iPhones and, MacBooks and Androids and whatever, and Toyotas and going on the journey of being able to do that and establishing liberal democracies and these types of things, and or what all the other things that other communities on the planet have been exploring. There have still been communities of people who've stayed with the sacred realities that live through the biosphere and live through nature and live through the body of the earth, and they have retained those sacred teachings and revelations and so on. So I feel like the rise of plant medicines in people, in the awareness of collective society, and that's coupled with our recognition of indigenous spirituality as something that is really important for us to reconnect to and recognize and welcome in the extraordinary truths and principles that they're holding, is part of this return. It's part of and it's a return to our bodies, it's a return to nature, it's a return to matter, to heal our relationship with it, because there is a healing that is necessary. Because you could say in the last 2,000 years of aspiring to the higher, the healthy way to do that would have been to differentiate from matter and orient to that. The unhealthy way has been the repression, the denial and aggression and violence towards matter, our bodies, our sexuality, indigenous communities, all the pieces that are connected to matter in that way. So, yeah. And then to speak about plant medicines more specifically, I feel like they have extraordinary transformational and healing power, and what good news, and such evidence of the love of life. I feel that these things are available, and obviously we're learning to relate to them rightly, and we're learning to work with them responsibly. And there's all sorts of really scary and painful realities that, big agricultural companies are wanting to farm iboga and, and the vines for ayahuasca, and just that dimension of humanity is trying to get its hands on that reality and possess it and control it and commodify it and manufacture it and so on. And that, for me, is part of the crisis that we're collectively in, that is going to have to end, that kind of way of operating. And maybe something I can just end on here is there's a part of the Trans-Himalayan Teachings that says, we received it just in the last years, that humanity has been edging towards needing to make a choice over the last decades, and a choice of that there's been enough evolution, enough development over a long period of time for us to get to a point where we can collectively choose our destiny on this planet, and basically said, okay, humanity has ultimately two choices here. And one choice is to continue on the path that it's been on, which is to perpetuate a culture of materialism and separation and hyper-individualism and the domination of each other and of nature. And if we choose to do that, we're on our path to our own self-destruction, and cosmically it's just, okay, that's just how some cycles go, and there'll be more cycles. Or we can choose to reorient, and we can choose to align ourselves with the soul of the earth and with the principles of compassion and wisdom and love that we know in our deep being are really the right way to live, and enter a healing process and call for the best from within us and between us. And if we choose to do that, then it's said that there will be a revelation of the forces of the soul of the earth and the externalization of the masters and the fields of initiates that are ready to come in and be part of the flowering of a soul-based culture on the planet very quickly, right, within the next 25 to 50 years. And there was a teaching that we received in, I think it was about 2020, which was where one of these teachers said, okay, we know that this has been the tension that humanity's been in, and there's been teachings given before around what choices humanity are going to make here. And he said, from our perspective on the inner side, now we can see that humanity has made a choice. That choice has been made. And we're talking about deep levels of humanity as a being, even making a choice. So it's a very deep level process that's being described. And he said, from our perspective on the inner side, it's clear that humanity has chosen to align itself with the soul of the earth and with that externalization. And
I'm happy that this was the choice.
Right, yeah. I mean, I can honestly tell you, reading that transmission, I read it alone, and it was one of the most significant moments of my life, because I, for 10 years before that, had been working hard to support in my way the right choice to be made.
So if people want to learn more and work more directly with you, please share your offerings.
Yeah, thank you. So I run a community called AVATARA, which is dedicated to all of these mysteries. It's dedicated to the kind of integration that I've been speaking about, of radical awakening and evolutionary awakening, of the gifts of different traditions all starting to plug themselves into a global, integral, cosmocentric spirituality. And yeah, if you want to connect to that, you can find AVATARA online at avatara.one. Also, we have the AVATARA Facebook group that has a lot of our community connected process. It's a really beautiful community of heart-centered, dedicated spiritual practitioners from all over the world. And there's an online course I'm running this year called Reality, the Great Tradition of Radical Awakening, which is worth checking out. And also 3 retreats, AVATARA retreats, one in Berlin, one in Finland, and one in the USA. So those are ways you can connect to us if you feel the impulse.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Give this video a thumbs up if you haven't already. And check out the next part with Jon Eden Khan right here. It will come out next week. So if you're in the future, you already see it. And I'm sending you much love and blessings.